Hi guys, welcome to book 17, The Beggar at the Manor. So in book 17 we see Odysseus finally make the return to his palace. We've been kind of anticipating this for several books now, and what you should have picked up on by now if you haven't already is that Odysseus remains in disguise. He's not coming home to the swineherd or to anybody else and saying, oh hey, I'm here, I'm home, I'm back. Which is a direct result of him hearing so much about how Agamemnon came home and was murdered, because he came home in a flourish and a parade and all that stuff, and then he was murdered. So Odysseus is pretty concerned about that. So what he's doing by being in disguise is he's coming home and doing a little recon as far as what does my palace look like, what does my queen look like, in what way can I come back and come out triumphant in this situation instead of murdered, like he had heard about Agamemnon. What you should also think about is in book 4, Helen did a little bit of foreshadowing for us, and she talked about how that Odysseus had come into the city of Troy under disguise and that nobody figured out that it was him. And so she kind of did a little foreshadowing for us, because here he comes again into battle, and he's in disguise. So here we go. When the young dawn came bright into the east, spreading her fingertips of rose, Telemachus, the king's son, tied his rawhide sandals and took the lance that bore his handgrave. Burning to be away and on the path to town, he told the swineherd, Uncle, the truth is I must go down myself to the city. Mother must see me there with her own eyes, or she will weep and feel forsaken still, and will not set her mind at rest. Your job will be to lead this poor man down to beg. Some householder may want to dole him out of a loaf and pint. I have my own troubles. Am I to care for every last man who comes? And if he takes it badly, well, so much the worse for him. Plain truth is what I favor. So Telemachus knows that Odysseus is Odysseus, as we saw in book 16. But he's the only one that knows, so he's part of the plan right now. And once Odysseus, the great tactician, spoke up briskly. Neither would I myself care to be kept here, lad. A beggar man fares to be better in the town. Let it be said, I am not so old I must lay up indoors and mumble, aye, aye, to a master. Go then, as you say, my friend can leave me as soon as I have had a bit of fire, and when the sun grows warmer. These old rags could be my death outside on a frosty morning, and the town is distant, so they say. Telemachus with no more words went out and through the fence and downhill, going fast on the steep footing, nursing woe for the suitors in his heart. Before the manor hall he leaned his lance against a great porch pillar, and stepped in across the doorstone. Old Euryclea saw him first, for the day she was covering handsome chairs nearby with clean fleeces. She ran to him at once, tears in her eyes, and other maidservants of the old soldier Odysseus gathered around to greet their prince, kissing his head and shoulders. Quickly then Penelope the wise, tall in her beauty as Artemis or pale gold Aphrodite, appeared from her high chamber and came down to throw her arms around her son. In tears she kissed his head, kissed both his shining eyes, and then cried out, her words flew, Back with me, Telemachus, more sweet to me than sunlight. I thought I should not see you again ever after you took the ship that night to Pylos against my will without a word. You went for news of your dear father. Tell me now everything you saw. But he made answer, Mother, not now. You make me weep. My heart already aches. I came near death at sea. You must bathe first of all and change your dress and take maids to the highest room to pray. Pray and burn offerings to the gods of heaven, that Zeus may put his hand to our revenge. So Telemachus is kind of giving some sort of hint here, but he's not going to tell Penelope what's actually happening. I am off now to bring home from the square a guest, a passenger I had. I sent him yesterday with all my crew to town. Piraeus was to care for him, I said, and keep him well with honor till I came. She caught back the swift words upon her tongue. Then softly she withdrew to bathe and dress her body in fresh linen, and make her offerings to the gods of heaven, praying Almighty Zeus to put his hand to their revenge. Telemachus had left the hall, taken his lance, and gone with 2 quick hounds at heel into the town. Athena's grace and his long stride made the people gaze as he came near. And suitors gathered, primed with friendly words, despite the deadly plotting in their hearts. But these all their crowd he kept away from. Next he saw, sitting some way off apart, Mentor with Antiphos and Hathareses, friends of his father's house in years gone by. Near these men he sat down and told his tale under their questioning. His crewman, young Pereisos, guided through the town, meanwhile into the square, the Argive exile, Theoclymenos. Telemachus lost no time in moving toward him, but first Pereios had his say. Telemachus, you must send maids to me at once, and let me turn over you those gifts from Menelaus. The prince pondered it and said, Pereios, none of us know how this affair will end. Say one day our fine suitors without warning draw upon me, kill me in our hall, and parcel out my patrimony. I wish you and none of them could have those things. But if my hour comes, if I can bring down bloody death and all that crew, you will rejoice to send my gifts to me, and so will I rejoice. He then departed, leading his guest, the lonely stranger, home. Over the chairbacks in the hall they dropped their mantles and passed in to the polished tubs where maids poured out warm baths for them, anointed them, and pulled fresh tunics, fleecy cloaks around them. Soon they were seated at their ease in the hall. A maid came by to tip a golden jug over their fingers into a silver bowl and draw a gleaming table up beside them. The larder mistress brought her tray of loaves and savories, dispensing each. In silence across the hall, beside a pillar, propped in a long chair, Telemachus's mother spun a fine wool yarn. The young men's hands went out upon the good things placed before them, and only when their hunger and thirst were gone did she look up and say, Telemachus, what am I to do now? Return alone and lie again in my forsaken bed, sodden how often with my weeping since that day when Odysseus put to sea to join the Aretidae before Troy? Could you not tell me before the suitors fill our house what news you have of this return? He answered, Now you ask a second time, dear mother, here's the truth. So he's going to tell her his story. We went ashore at Pylos to Nestor, lord and guardian of the West, who gave a welcome of his towering hall. So kind he was, he might have been my father and I his long-lost son, so truly kind, taking me in with his own honored sons. But as to Odysseus's bitter fate, living or dead, he had no news at all from anyone on earth, he said. He sent me overland in a strong chariot to Atreus' son, the captain Menelaus. And I saw Helen there, for whom the Argives fought, and the Trojans fought, as the gods willed. Then Menelaus of the great war cry asked me my errand in that ancient land, in Lacedaemon. So as I told our story, in reply he burst out, Intolerable! That feeble man, unfit as those men are, should think to lie in that great captain's bed, fawns in the lion's lair, as if a doe put down her litter of sucklings there while she sniffed at the glen or grazed a grassy hollow. Ha! Then the Lord returns to his own bed and deals out wretched doom for both alike. So will Odysseus deal out doom on these. O Father Zeus, Athena, Apollo, I pray he comes home at once, as once he was in Lesbos when he stood up to wrestle Philomedes, captain and island king, and smashed him down. How the Achaeans cheered! If that Odysseus could meet the suitors, they'd have a quick reply, a stunning dowry. Now, for your questions, let me come to the point. I would not misinterpret you. Let me tell you what the ancient of the sea, the infallible seer, told me. So basically, Telemachus is recounting all of the things that he was told by Menelaus about Odysseus actually being lost and not dead. On an island, your father lies and grieves. The ancients saw him, held by a nymph, Calypso, in her hall. No means of sailing home remained to him, no ship with oars and no ship's company to pull him on the broad back of the sea. I had this from the Lord Marshal Menelaus, and when my errand in that place was done, I left for home. A fair breeze from the gods brought me swiftly back to our dear island. The boy's tale made her heart stir in her breast, but this was not all. Mother and son now heard Theoclymenos, the diviner, said, He does not see it clear, O gentle lady, wife of Odysseus, Laertes. Listen to me, and I can reveal this thing. Zeus be my witness in the table set for strangers in the hearth which I've come. The Lord Odysseus, I tell you, is present now already on this island. Quartered somewhere, going about, he knows what evil is afoot. He has it in him to bring black hour on the suitors. Yesterday, still at the ship, I saw this in a portent. I read the sign aloud. I told Telemachus. The prudent queen, for her part, said, Stranger, if only this came true, our love would go to you with many gifts. I and every man who passed would call you happy. So ran the talk between these three. Meanwhile, swaggering before Odysseus' hall, the suitors were competing at the discus-thrown javelin on the level, measured field. But when the dinner hour drew on and beasts were driven from the fields to slaughter, as beasts were every day, Medon spoke, Medon the crier, who the suitors liked. He took his meat beside them. Men, he said, each one has had his work out and his pleasure. Come to hall now, time to make our feast. Are discus throws more admirable than roast when the proper hour comes? At this reminder, they all broke up their games and trailed away into the gracious timbered hall. There first they dropped their cloaks on chairs, then came to their ritual, putting out great rams and fats to go to the knife, pigs and cow, too. So they made their feast. During those hours, Odysseus and the swineherd were on their way to the hills to town. So this is what's happening in the house, and now we're kind of going to a different part. We're going outside the palace to see Odysseus making his journey to the palace. The forester had got them started, saying, "Friend, you have hopes, I know, of your adventure in the heart of town today. My lord wishes it so, not I. No, I should rather you stood here as guardian of our steading. But I owe reverence to my prince and fear he'll make my ears burn later if I fail. A master's tongue has a rough edge. Off we go. Part of this day is past, and nightfall will be early and colder too." Who had it all timed in his head? Odysseus, who had it all timed in his head, replied, "I know as well as you do. Let's move on. You lead the way the whole way. Have you got a staff, a lopped stick, so you could let me use to put my weight on when I slip? This path is hard going," they said. Odysseus is being a little deceptive here. He's trying to continue to build the story as he started in book 16 and earlier, that he is in fact a beggar. He's like, oh, they say this path is hard. Like, as in I don't know it. Over his shoulders he slung his patched up knapsack, an old bundle tied with twine. Eumaeus found a stick for him, the kind he wanted, and the two set out, leaving the boys and dogs to guard the place. In this way good Eumaeus led his lord down to the city. And it seemed to him he led an old outcast, a beggar man, leaning most painfully upon a stick, his poor cloak all in tatters looped about him. Down by the stony trail they made their way as far as Clearwater, not far from town, a spring house where the people filled their jars. Ithacos, Neritos, and Polyctor built it, and round it on the human ground above a grove, a circular wood of poplars grew. Ice cold in runnels from a high rock ran the spring, and over it there stood an altar stone to let the cool nymphs, where all men going by laid offering. Here the son of Dolios crossed their path, Melanthios. He was driving a string of choice goats for the evening meal, with 2 goatherds beside him, and no sooner did he lay eyes upon the wayfarers than he began to growl and taunt them both, so grossly that Odysseus' heart grew hot. "Here comes one scurvy type leading another. God pairs them off together every time. Swineherd, where are you taking your new pig, that stinking beggar there, liquor of pots? How many doorposts has he rubbed on his back, whining for garbage, where a noble guest would rate a cauldron or a sword? Hand him over to me, I'll make a farmhand of him, a stall scraper, a fodder carrier, while way for drink will put good muscle on this shank. No chance. He learned his dodges long ago. No honest sweat. He'd rather tramp the country begging to keep his hoggish belly full. Well, I can tell you this for sure. In King Odysseus' hall, if he goes there, footstools will fly around his head. Good shots from strong hands. Back and side, his ribs will catch it on the way out." So not only does he insult Odysseus and say that he'll basically make him a stall scraper, which if you've ever been to like a farm and you've been inside the barn, those stalls have to be scraped out, and essentially the feces have to be removed because the animals just poop in their stalls. And so he's basically telling him, you know, you'd be a good poop mover, essentially, for lack of a better term. So maybe you can use that with your friends if you're upset at them. You can call them a poop mover or a stall scraper. All right, anyway, back to the story. And like a drunken fool, he kicked at Odysseus' hip as he walked by. So not only does he call him a bunch of bad names and tell him he's just good enough to clean horse manure, he also kicks him. So as you think about this, Odysseus is probably not very pleased. But remember, his whole goal is to stay in disguise. So he has to mentally make these choices, these internal conflicts. Do I go after him and beat the crap out of him, because I totally can? Or do I stick with my disguise and my plan? Which is more important to me? Not even jogged off stride or off the trail, the Lord Odysseus walked along, debating inwardly whether to whirl and beat the life out of his fellow with his stick, or toss him, brain him on the stony ground. Then he controlled himself and bore it quietly. Not so the swineherd. Seeing the man before him, he raised his arm and cried, Nymphs of the spring, daughters of Zeus, as ever Odysseus burnt you a thigh bone and rich fat, a ram's or kid's thigh bone, hear me, grant my prayer, let our true Lord come back, let heaven bring him to rid the earth of these fine courtly ways. Melanthius picks up about the town, all wind and wind, bad shepherds ruin flocks. Melanthius the goatherd answered him, Bless me, the dog can snap. How he goes on. Someday I'll take him to a slave ship overseas and trade him for a herd. Old Silverbow Apollo, if he shot clean through Telemachus in hall today, what luck! Or let the suitors cut him down. Odysseus died at sea, no coming home for him. So Melanthius, not only goes after the swineherd who insulted him, but then he also insults Odysseus and his son, saying like, oh, wouldn't it be so bad if Telemachus was murdered today? How lucky that would be, so that we could all move on. He flung this out and left the two behind to come on slowly, where he went hurrying to the king's hall. There he slipped in and sat among the suitors, beside the one he doted on, Eurymachus. Then working servants helped him to his meat, and the mistress of the larder gave him bread. So Melanthius insults him, then goes inside and starts to eat. Reaching the gate, Odysseus and the forester halted and stood outside, for harp notes came around them rippling in the air, as Phemios picked out a song. Odysseus caught his companion's arm and said, My friend, here is a beautiful place. Who could mistake it? Here is Odysseus's hall. No hall like this. See how one chamber grows out of another. See how the court is tight with wall and coping. See how no men at arms could break this gateway down. Your banqueting young lords are here in force, I gather, from the fumes of mutton roasting and strum of harping which the gods appoint sweet friend of feasts. And oh, my swineherd, you replied. That was quick recognition, but you are no numbskull in this or anything. Now we must plan this action. Will you take leave of me here and go ahead alone and make your entrance now among the suitors? Or do you choose to wait? Let me go forward and go in first. Do not delay too long. Someone might find you skulking here outside and take a club to you, or heave a lance. Bear this in mind, I say. So, in other words, be careful. Someone might hurt you. The patient hero Odysseus answered, Just what I was thinking. You go in first and leave me here a little. But as for blows and missiles, I am no tyro at these things. I learned to keep my head in hardship, years of war and years at sea. Let this new trial come. The cruel belly, can you hide its ache? How bitter days it brings. Long ships with good stout planks athwart. Would fighters rig them and ride the barren sea, except for hunger? Sea wolves, woe to their enemies. While he spoke, an old hound lying near picked up its ears and lifted its muzzle. This was Argus, trained as a puppy by Odysseus. His master sailed for Troy, but never taken on a hunt before his master sailed for Troy. The young men afterward hunted wild goats with him, and hare and deer, but he had grown old in his master's absence. Treated as rubbish now, he lay last upon a mass of dung before the gates, manure of mules and cows, piled there until field hands could spread it on the king's estate. Abandoned there and half destroyed with flies, old Argus lay. But when he knew he heard Odysseus' voice nearby, he did his best to wag his tail, nose down, with flattened ears, having no strength to move nearer to his master. And the man looked away, wiping a salt tear from his cheek. But he hid this from Eumaeus. Then he said, I marveled that they leave that hound to lie here on the dung pile. He would have been a fine dog from the look of him, though I can't say as to his power and speed when he was young. You find the same good build in house dogs, table dogs, landowners keep all for style. And then you replied, Eumaeus, a hunter owned him, but the man is dead in some far place. If this old hound could show the form that he had when Lord Odysseus left him going to Troy, you'd see him swift and strong. He never shrank from any savage thing he'd brought to bay in the deep woods. On the scent no other dog kept up with him. Now misery has him in leash. His owner died abroad, and here the women slaves will take no care of him. You know how servants are. Without a master, they have no will to labor or excel. For Zeus, who views the wide world, takes away half the manhood of a man. That day he goes into the captivity and slavery. Eumaeus crossed the court and went straight forward into the Megaron among the suitors. But death and darkness in that instant closed the eyes of Argus, who has seen his master, Odysseus, after 20 years. So the dog lives for 20 years, And I'm sure you guys have either had a dog or known a dog. For a dog to live 20 years in general is a long time. But this dog is laying on this pile of manure, and it knows it's Odysseus. That's why it wags its tail. Kind of like when you would come into a room and your dog or a dog that you would meet would wag its tail. And Odysseus has to make the choice to ignore the dog, even though he weeps for it, because he knows if he goes to the dog, they will know that he is, in fact, Odysseus. So he's got to keep his secret. But the dog is such a good example of faithfulness, because the dog, even though it's been left in desolation, it waits 20 years to see him, and once it sees Odysseus, it can finally pass on. Long before anyone else, Telemachus caught sight of the gray woodsman coming from the door and called him over with a quick jerk of his head. Eumaeus's narrowed eyes made out an empty bench beside the one the carver used, that servant who had no respite, carving for the suitors. This bench he took possession of and placed it across the table from Telemachus for his own use. Then the two men were served cuts from a roast and bread from a bread basket. At no long interval, Odysseus came through his own doorway as a mendicant, humped like a bundle of rags over his stick. He settled in the inner ash wood sill, leaning against the door jamb, cypress timber the skilled carpenter planed years ago and set up with the plumb line. Now Telemachus took an entire loaf and double handful of roast meat. Then he said to the forester, "Give these to the stranger there, but tell him to go among the suitors on his own, that he may beg all he wants. This hanging back is no asset to a hungry man." The swineherd rose at once, crossed to the door, and halted by Odysseus. "Friend," he said, "Telemachus is pleased to give you these, but he commands you approach the suitors, that you may ask all you want from them. He adds that your shyness is no asset to a beggar." The great tactician, lifting up his eyes, cried, "Zeus aloft! A blessing from Telemachus. Let all things come to pass as he desires." Palms held out in the beggar's gesture, he received the bread and meat and put down before him on his knapsack, lowly table. Then he fell to devouring it. Meanwhile the harper in the great room sang a song. Not till the man was fed did the sweet harper end his singing, whereupon the company made his walls ring again with talk. Unseen, Athena took her place beside Odysseus, whispering in his ear, "Yes, try the suitors. You may collect a few more loaves and learn who are the decent lads and who are vicious, although not one can be excused from death." So Athena kind of makes her way. Again, she's guiding Odysseus, and she tells him, you can do some recon and figure it out, who's decent and who's bad, but the ones who are vicious, you have to kill them all. You have to kill them all. So he appealed to them one after another, going from left to right with open palm, as though his life had been spent in beggary. And they gave bread for pity, wondering, though, at the strange man. Who could this beggar be? Where did he come from? Each would ask his neighbor, and till in their midst the goatherd, Melanthios, raised his voice. So here's our good friend Melanthios again, the guy that Odysseus met on the street. "Hear just a word from me, my lords, who court our illustrious queen. This man, this foreigner, I saw him on the road. The swineherd here was leading him this way. Who or what or whence he claims to be, I could not say for sure." At this, Antinous turned to the swineherd brutally, saying, "You famous breeder of pigs, why bring this fellow here? Are we not plagued with enough beggars, foragers, and such rats? You find the company too slow at eating up your lord's estate, is that it? So you call this scarecrow in?" The forester, meaning the swineherd, replied, "Antinous, well born you are, but that was not well said. Who would call in a foreigner? Unless an artisan was skilled to serve the realm, a healer, a prophet, or a builder, or one whose harp and song might give us joy, all these are sought for in the endless earth. But when have beggars come by invitation? Who puts a field mouse in his granary? My lord, you are a handman, and you always were, so more than others of this company, hard on all Odysseus' people and on me. But this I can forget, as long as Penelope lives on, and the wise and tender mistress of this hall, as long as Prince Telemachus—" But he broke off at a look from Telemachus, who said, "Be still. Spare me a long-drawn answer to this gentleman. With his unpleasantness, he will forever make strife where he can, and goad the others on." He turned and spoke clearly to Antinous. "What fatherly concern you show me! Frighten this unknown fellow, would you, from my hall, with words that promise blows? May God forbid it! Give him a loaf. Am I a niggard? No, I call on you to give, and spare your qualms as my mother's loss, or anybody, not in that truth you have such care at heart. Your heart is all in feeding, not in giving. Antinous replied, What high and mighty talk, Telemachus? Antinous is so sassy. No holding you. If every suitor gave what I may give him, he could be kept for months, kept out of sight. He reached under the table for the footstool his shining feet had rested on, and this he held up so that all could see his gift. Here we go. But all the rest gave alms, enough to fill the beggar's pack with bread and roast meat. So it looked as though Odysseus had his taste of what these men were like and could return scot-free to his own doorway. But halting now before Antinous, he made a little speech to him. Said he, Give a mite, my friend. I would not say myself you're the worst man of the young Achaeans, the noblest rather, kingly by your look. Therefore you'll give more bread than the others do. Let me speak well of you as I pass over the boundless earth. I too, you know, have fortune once, lived well, stood well with men, and gave alms often to poor wanderers, like this one, as you can see. I, all the sorts, no matter in what dire want. I owned servants, many, God knows, and the rest that goes with being prosperous, as they say. But Zeus, the son of Cronos, brought me down. No telling why he would have it, but he made me go to Egypt with a company of rovers, to a long sail to the south for my undoing. Up the broad Nile and onto the river bank I brought my dipping squadron. There, indeed, I told the men to stand guard at the ships. I sent patrols out to the rising ground, but reckless greed carried my crews away to plunder the Egyptian farms. They bore off wives and children, killed what men they found. The news ran in the wind to the city, a night cry, and sunrise brought both infantry and horsemen, filling the river plain with a dazzled bronze. Then Zeus, the Lord of Lightning, threw my men into a blind panic. No one dared to stand against the host closing around us. Their scything weapons left our dead in piles, but some they took alive into forced labor among them. And they gave me then one to Demeter, a traveler, son of Iasus, who ruled at Cyprus. He conveyed me there, from that place working northward miserably. But here Antinous broke in, shouting, God, what evil blew in this pest? Get over, stand in the passage. Nudge my table, will you? Egyptian whips are sweet to what you'll come to here, you nosing rat, making your pitch to everyone. These men have bread to throw away on you because it's not theirs. Who cares? Who spares another's food when he has more than plenty? With guile, Odysseus drew away, then said, A pity that you have more looks than heart. You'll grudge a pinch of salt when from your own larder to your own handyman. You sit there fat on others' meat, and cannot bring yourself to rummage a crust of bread for me. Then anger made Antinous' heart beat hard. Then glowering under his brows, he answered, You think you'll shuffle off and get away after that impudence? Oh, no, you don't. The stool that he let fly hit the man's right shoulder on the packed muscle under the shoulder blade, like solid rock for all the effect one saw. Odysseus only shook his head, containing thoughts of bloody work, as he walked on and sat and dropped his loaded bag again upon the doorsill. Facing the whole crowd, he said, and eyed them all, One word only, my lords and suitors of the famous queen. One thing I have to say. There is no pain, no burden from the heart when blows come to a man, and he defending his own cattle, his own cows and lambs. Here it was otherwise. Antinous hit me for being driven on by hunger. How bitter seas men cross for hunger. It beggars interest the gods if there are furies pent in the dark to avenge a poor man's wrong, then may Antinous meet his death before his wedding day. Then Eupeithes' son, Antinous, said, Enough! Eat and be quiet where you are, or shamble elsewhere unless you want these lads to stop your mouth, pulling you by the heels or hands or feet over the whole floor till your back is peeled. But now the rest were mortified, and someone spoke from the crowd of young bucks to rebuke him. A poor show that, hitting this famished tramp. Bad business if he happened to be a god. You know they go in foreign guise, the gods do, looking like strangers, turning up in towns and settlements to keep an eye on manners, good or bad. Here we go with the manners thing, the hospitality thing. Because even though these men are not owners of the palace and the sheep and the things that they're killing, they're still receiving the guests. If you notice, Penelope's not the one that's receiving the guests. So technically they still fall under that hospitality code. But at this notion, Antinous Antinous only shrugged. Telemachus, after the blow his father bore, sat still without a tear, though his heart felt the blow. Slowly he shook his head from side to side, containing murderous thoughts. So everybody's keeping chill because they want in the end to attack the suitors, and if they blow their cover now, it's not going to happen. Penelope on the higher level of her room had heard the blow and knew who gave it. Now she murmured, would God you could be hit yourself, Antinous, hit by Apollo's bow shot. And Eurynome, her housekeeper, put in, he and no other? If all we pray for came to pass, not one would live till dawn. Her gentle mistress said, Oh, Nan, they are a bad lot. They intend to ruin for all of us, but Antinous appears a blacker-hearted hound than any. Here is a poor man come, a wanderer, driven by want to beg his bread, and everyone in hall gave bits to cram his bag, only Antinous threw a stool and banged his shoulder. So she described it, sitting in her chamber among her maids, where her true lord was eating. Then she called in the forester and said, Go to that man on my behalf, Eumaeus, and send him here so I can greet and question him. Abroad in the great world he may have heard rumors about Odysseus, may have known him. Then you replied, O swineherd, Ah, my queen, if those Achaean sprigs would hush their babble, the man could tell you tales to charm your heart. 3 days and nights I kept him in my hut, and he came straight off a ship, you know, to me. There was no end to what he made me hear of his hard roving, and I listened, eyes upon him as a man drinks in a tale, a minstrel sings, a minstrel taught by heaven to touch the hearts of men. At such a song the listener becomes rapt and still. Just so I found myself enchanted by this man. He claims an old tie with Odysseus, too, in his home country, the Minoan land of Crete. From Crete he came, a rolling stone washed by the gales of life this way and that way to our own beach. If he can be believed, he has news of Odysseus near at hand, alive in the rich country of Thesprotia, bringing a mass of treasure home. Then wise Penelope said again, Go call him, let him come here, let him tell the tale for my own ears. Our friends can drink their cups outside or stay in hall, being so carefree, and why not? Their stores lie intact in their home, both food and drink, with only servants left to take a little. But these men spend their days around our house, killing our beeves, our goats, and our sheep, grousing, drinking up good dark wine, sparing nothing, squandering everything. No champion like Odysseus takes our part. Ah, if he comes again, no falcon ever struck more suddenly than he will with his son. Avenge this outrage. So there's that bird imagery again. The great hall below at this point rang with a tremendous sneeze, Ka-choo! From Telemachus, like an acclamation, and laughter seized Penelope. Then quickly, lucidly, she went on, Go call that stranger straight to me. Did you hear that, Eumaeus? My son's thundering sneeze at what I said. May death come of a sudden so, and may death relieve us clean as that of all the suitors. Let me add one thing, do not overlook it. If I can see this man who has told the truth, I promise him a warm new cloak and tunic. With all this in his head, the forester went down to the hall and halted near the beggar, saying aloud, Good father, you are called to the wise mother of Telemachus, Penelope. The queen, despite her troubles, is moved by a desire to hear your tales about her lord, and if she finds them true, she'll see you clothed in what you need, a cloak and a fresh tunic. You may have your belly full each day you go about this realm begging, for all may give and all they wish. Now said Odysseus, the old soldier, Friend, I wish this instant I could tell my facts to the wise daughter of Icarius, Penelope, and I have much to tell her about her husband. We went through much together. But just now this hard crowd worries me. They are, as you said, infamous to the very rim of heaven for violent acts. And here just now this fellow gave me a bruise. What have I done to him? But who would lift a hand for me? Telemachus? Anyone else? No, bid the queen be patient. Let her remain till sundown in her room, and then if she will seat me near the fire, inquire tonight about her lord's return. My rags are sorry cover, you know that. I showed my sad condition first to you. The woodsman heard him out and then returned, but the queen met him on the threshold, crying, Have you not brought him? Why? What is he thinking? He has some fear of overstepping, shy about these inner rooms, a hangdog beggar? To this you answered, my friend Eumaeus, No, he reasons as another might, and well, not to tempt any swordplay from these drunkards. Be patient, wait, he says, till darkness falls. And oh, my queen, for you too that is better to be alone with him and question him and hear him out. Penelope replied, He is no fool. He sees how it could be. Never were mortal men like these for bullying and brainless arrogance. Thus she accepted what had been proposed, so he went back into the crowd. He joined Telemachus and said at once in whispers, his head bent so that no one else might hear, "Dear Prince, I must go home and keep good watch on hut and swine, and look at my own affairs. Everything here is in your hands. Consider your own safety before the rest. Take care to not get hurt. Many are dangerous here. May Zeus destroy them first before we suffer." Telemachus said, "Your wish is mine, uncle. But when your meal is finished, go when your meal is finished. Then come back at dawn and bring good victims for a slaughter. Everything here is in my hands indeed, and in the disposition of the gods." Taking a seat on the smooth bench again, Eumaeus ate and drank his fill, then rose to climb the mountain trail back to his swine, leaving the Megaron and court behind him, crowded with banqueters. These had their joy of dance and song as day waned into evening. Okay, so that is the end of Book 17. So Odysseus is going to wait till nightfall, and then he's going to talk to Penelope. And keep in mind, he's going to be in disguise. So we'll see what happens.